Russia's President Vladimir Putin says he has held constructive talks with the Turkish leader on reviving an agreement allowing Ukraine to export grain. Putin met with Recep Tayyip Erdogan for 3 hours in the Russian city of Sochi, but there has been no breakthrough. The previous agreement allowed Ukraine to export its grain from ports on the Black Sea to the world. It was brokered by Erdogan and the UN. Putin says Moscow was forced to withdraw from the deal in July and will not renew it until the West allows Russia to export agricultural products. Our correspondent Dorian Jones is following this story for us, joins us now from Istanbul. Dorian, Putin said the talks were constructive, but he's not ready yet to renew the grain deal. What does he mean?
Well, I think we've just seen a reiteration on Putin's stance that he's not ready to return to the grain deal. I think this will be a disappointment for the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Ahead of this meeting, he said that the saving and restoring of the grain deal was the priority in his meeting with Putin. And we have to remember that Erdogan, along with the United Nations General Secretary General Antonio Guterres, had brokered the deal. It was a major political and diplomatic coup for Erdogan, and he really has been working very hard behind the scenes to get that deal working again. Now, despite these intense talks with Putin, it appears that there has been little progress made. This will be a blow to Erdogan because he's many ways seen the success of the grain deal as a vindication of his very controversial stance of maintaining a balanced approach of good ties with both Moscow and with Kiev and Turkey's Western allies. Now, the fact that this grain deal hasn't been resumed will be a blow for Erdogan, given the fact that he had put so much efforts ahead of this meeting.
Now, there was talk that Putin has an alternative plan to export that grain. Do you know more about that?
Yes, President Putin has been talking about this for some time. He's talking about of the distribution of 1 million tons of grain. He says that Russia will give this for free, and it will be part of a deal working in cooperation with Turkey and Qatar. The grain will be sent by Russia to Turkey, which would then process it into flour, and then that would be distributed to what was described as 6 of the most needy African countries. Unclear who those countries are, but it is believed to be countries that do have close ties with Moscow. Moscow's been under a lot of pressure from its African allies over the failing of this grain deal, given the fact that Africa has been hit hard by rising grain prices. Now, this deal is potentially controversial, as it's unclear whether some of that grain that would potentially be exported to Turkey could be grain that has been stolen from Ukraine. That will raise major sanctions questions. And I think this is part of a ploy by Moscow to draw Turkey closer to Russia and away from its Western allies. There has been concern in Moscow that Turkey is moving a bit too close to its Western allies in the last few months, and I think this could be an effort to move Turkey back into the fold with Russia. It has to be said that this deal will not replace the grain deal. We're talking about 1 million tons. Under the Ukrainian grain export deal, 30 million tons were exported. So this is very much a much more low-key thing, but Russia says this is about distributing grain to those who are most in need of grain and to avert a humanitarian crisis. But there'll be a lot of question marks over this deal, particularly from Turkey's Western allies.
Now, you've touched upon this, but tell us a bit more about Erdogan's role in all these negotiations.
Well, indeed. Now, Erdogan, after meeting with Putin, said that he is constructing a package of proposals that he will take to United Nations, where he's going to meet with the Secretary General Antonio Guterres, possibly on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly later this month, and whereby they will outline Russia's calls and demands to return to the grain deal. Now, Russia once says that this grain deal that it signed up to, none of the promises that were made to Moscow were lived up to, particularly the exporting of Russian grain and fertilizer. He says that has been presented because Russian bank, the agricultural bank, has been excluded from the international payment system, making payment for Russian agricultural products very difficult. Now, that has been challenged by both the United Nations and by the European Union and the United States, who said they have come up with alternative arrangements that would allow the payment of Russian agricultural goods. And it has been seen that this is just a delaying tactic by Russia to avoid return returning to the deal because it knows it causes Ukraine a great deal of problems, given there's a new harvest, more grain being stacked up in Ukraine, and this will also increase food prices around the world, will again put pressure on both Ukraine's Western allies and those who are calling for an end to the conflict.
DW correspondent Dorian Jones there reporting from Istanbul. Thank you very much, Dorian.